What is dating like when you're living with HIV? And what is dating like when you're living with HIV in one of the places hardest hit by the HIV pandemic? Today, we meet Brian Ahimbisibwe, a 34-year-old psychosocial counselor living and working in southwest Uganda. Half a lifetime ago, Brian was a schoolboy yearning for a dance with a girl, and maybe even a kiss.
I just wanted someone to love and who loves me back.
Brian wondered if this would ever happen. Could somebody love him?
And that used to eat me up so much. I always wanted to have a family. I always wanted to have kids. But I never wanted to pass on the virus. I was wondering how would that ever be possible.
So Brian embarked on a quest to find out. To find love. Hello and welcome to Beyond, a podcast from the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. I'm your host, Eric Bond. On today's episode, Brian Ahimbisibwe, The Power of Love. Join me. Brian grew up in Kabale, a farming community in southwestern Uganda, near the borders of Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo.
This is a small town where everyone knows everyone and people are willing to help and people will walk to you and ask if you needed help and people will greet you.
It is also a community that was hit hard by the HIV pandemic in the 1990s. Virtually every household had lost a family member to HIV, often more than one. There was residual fear and misunderstanding about the virus. Brian was born with HIV, but he survived the bleak years. He always took his medication, and at the age of 17, he was a healthy adolescent. And like any healthy teenager, he was obsessed with love, and one person in particular.
There was this beautiful girl who liked me and I liked her.
He wondered if he dared to ask her out.
But the thing is, all the boys who were my friends actually wanted her.
An end-of-term party was coming up, and Brian's friends were vying for her favor. But Brian feared rejection. 4 years earlier, he had learned about his HIV status. It was a secret that he only shared with his closest friends. He wasn't sure if he was willing to take a chance. What if she found out about his status?
And she turned everyone down. So a day or two to the party, she walks to me and she's like, "Hi, Brian, do you have a dance date?" I'm like, "No." So she says, "Would you mind being my dance date?" Of course, I was excited. Everyone in my clique wanted this girl and she's asking if I can be her date. So I go back to the dormitory, very excited, celebrating, and I call the boys and I'm like, "Hey, you know what? It's me that's dancing with her tomorrow." And they're like, "No, there's no way she would accept you." I said, "Well, wait." So I get my nice shoe from my cousin. I had to borrow it. And I'm really smart. So when the D-Day comes, I walk to her. And it's a whole different person. I asked to dance and she doesn't want to dance. And then I'm wondering why. Just a few days ago, you asked if I could be your date and you now do not want to dance with me. And all she replied me was, "I don't think we can dance anymore." I said, "Why?" Like, "Because you will smear me with your HIV."
Brian's mouth went dry. All he could hear was his heart beating fast. Then Brian noticed that the other boys were watching. Had they told her about his HIV status? Later, Brian would learn that they had.
So with all that devastation, I ran to my dormitory. I cried. I was very sad.
And just when he felt that his heart could not take any more,
This girl actually told her friends as well about my status. And in the long run, literally everyone in my class got to know about it. When I would go to class, no one would want to sit with me because of my HIV status. People telling you can't use makeup, we can't share a bed, we can't play the same game because of your status.
Brian was 13 when he learned that he had been living with HIV since birth. Previous to learning his status, he had been a precocious child, top of his class, played trombone in the brass band, outgoing and open.
I was a very loved child. I mean, I was raised in thoughtfulness, in kindness, as loved. Until the HIV came in, I thought we were a community that loved each other, that was mindful about each other's well-being, and boom, now you are being treated differently. You've been told that you see the person that has lived the longest with HIV died at 17, and I won't grow beyond this age.
After that rejection on the dance floor, Brian withdrew.
That's where my mental health breakdown came in. And at that point I actually stopped school. I didn't want to go to school because I couldn't take it anymore.
Fortunately, Brian had another group of friends. If you remember back to episode 2 of this podcast, Josephine was a member of an aerial club in the capital city of Kampala. Here on the other side of the country, deep in rural Uganda, Brian also belonged to an aerial club, a psychosocial support group for adolescents living with HIV. Brian, where would you be now if you had not had that support group when the girl rejected you?
I would have taken my life. This would have been the last nail in the coffin for me. I would have felt okay. I think what everyone has said before is true. I was wondering, why is it happening to me and not anyone else? Where did I get HIV from? Is there anyone else in my class or my age mate that has HIV? And all that made me feel lonely. And every time I felt lonely, I always looked forward to the next EGPAF Area Psychosocial Support Club, where I knew I would meet colleagues like me and peers and have fun and share experience and have a nice time. Somehow it built in us that confidence, that resilience to carry on amidst any mental health challenges that we're going through at the moment. Feeling loved, feeling that you belong. You wouldn't expect me to go to my doctor and tell them how I've been dumped by my girlfriend or how I've not been accepted. Psychosocial support clubs tend to address building a community of like-minded young people that can relate with each other, with or without a health worker or a doctor, getting to their personal perspective.
So Brian turned to his support group friends after he was stigmatized at the dance.
I told them of my experience. And lucky enough, there was someone in the older classes who was older than me who had the same experience. And so he took me through on how he overcame it.
The older boy explained to Brian that he overcame stigma in dating by broaching the subject of HIV gently with any potential romantic partner to find out if she knows about HIV, to find out how she feels about people living with HIV. This way you can learn if she's ready to date someone living with HIV or not. If she isn't, you walk away before she breaks your heart.
And I tell the young people even today that because they've asked you to disclose, that doesn't mean you go to a stadium and tell everyone. You have to assess and know if this is the right person to tell about my status or if they're not. And so I used my friends' experiences to now build my own confidence on how I was going to date and relate.
Other members of the group told Brian that they avoided the pain of stigma by only dating other people living with HIV. Brian went back to school. He was reticent to date, so he focused on his aerial club activities, including the annual aerial camp, when kids living with HIV from around Uganda would come together for a week of sharing experiences and having fun and dancing like normal teenagers. Brian credits the peer support group with building him up to the point that the old Brian, the confident, happy Brian, reemerged. By the time he was 19, Brian was heading to university. He had toughened up. He was no longer the same boy who had been crushed on the dance floor. But he was tired of hiding who he is, even if it meant facing rejection sometimes. And he was not content to limit himself to only dating girls living with HIV.
Love does not know status. For me, I've always been open to loving. I mean, how other way would love be genuine? When you meet love, you meet love. I just wanted someone to love and who loves me back. If they were my same status, I wouldn't mind it. If they were not, it was an opportunity for me to actually give them the right information about HIV and see if they'll still love me.
The right information, Brian learned, is that a person who is taking medication and whose HIV status is undetectable cannot transmit the virus to their partner. This is called U equals U. Undetectable is untransmittable.
I wanted to change the status quo. As soon as I learned about the undetectable equals untransmittable.
Brian was surprised to see that by being open about his HIV status, he actually got more dates.
When you got to university, did you still face rejection from girls?
No, I didn't. As now more empowered, every time someone asked me about my status, I used it as an opportunity to actually tell them the other side of HIV that they never hear about.
Brian found himself educating people about HIV in some of the oddest moments. One time he even found himself educating a group of guys who were hitting on his girlfriend.
So there's this girl I was dating and went out to the club to have a few drinks and dance. And she was a very beautiful girl.
At a certain point, Brian left her at the table while he went to the bathroom. While he was gone, a group of guys sidled up to the table. Much like the guys back at the end of term dance, they told Brian's date that she should dump him because he is living with HIV.
And when I came back, she told me, you know what? About 3 guys who have been hitting on me in the club. The first thing they told me is like, we pity you. How are you moving out with this guy? So they told her about my status, about how I'm going to infect her, and how she's going to die.
Brian's date was well aware of his HIV status. Now that Brian had returned, she called the guys back over and explained that Brian posed no danger to her, and that she was going home with him.
And we became friends. It was actually an opportunity to give them the right information about HIV, because my ultimate goal has always been to normalize HIV, but not to have it at the forefront of our relationship.
One day, while he was still at the university, Brian ran into a familiar face from high school. It was the very girl who had broken his heart at the dance back when he was 17. They were both going on a study trip and found themselves on the same bus.
So when I was coming out of the bus, I looked at my watch. It was 7 p.m. It was my time for taking my medication. So I ran to my bag, picked my medication, and swallowed it.
The young woman approached Brian and asked him about the medication.
He said, because I saw you take medication, I'm just wondering if you need any help or if you're exhausted from the journey. I said, no, I'm not. He's like, so why are you taking medication? So I remind her, I'm like, do you remember so many years ago what my friends told you? I'm like, about my HIV? She said, yes. I'm like, yes, the medicine you saw me take is for HIV.
She is astounded.
She's like, no, it can't be. We were told people with HIV don't live to this age that you are. So there is no way that you had HIV then and you're still living and you're as healthy as you are right now.
When she saw Brian alive on the bus, she figured that maybe those high school rumors were wrong.
So I pulled out the drugs and showed her, you see, these are the drugs I've been taking all my life. People who take their drugs well do not have a lifespan like you're told. So I'm not about to die. They live healthy lives, and if their viral load is not detectable, they can actually not transmit the virus to anyone else. She breaks down and starts crying. She said, you know, Brian, you're a good person. I liked you in high school. And your friends told me you're going to give me HIV. In any case, you're even going to die. So fast forward, we became close.
Well, they don't date, but Brian becomes like a brother to her. And over the years, she comes to Brian for advice. Eventually, she gets into a serious relationship and asks Brian how she can talk about HIV with her boyfriend.
She actually walked to me and said, "You know what, Brian? I found this guy, he's nice, but how do I tell him that we do an HIV test? Because from your experience, I mean, you look healthy, you're very handsome, and I can't know if he has HIV or not." So I gave her a hug.
Brian congratulates her and tells her that she just needs to tell her boyfriend that the result does not need to change their relationship. If the boyfriend does have HIV, he can control it. As it turns out, both of them test negative for HIV. The couple continues to date and eventually they marry, and soon they're expecting their first child. The girl who once rejected Brian at the high school dance now honored him.
She decided to name her first son Brian.
Today, Brian has a master's in public health and works with young people. He facilitates psychosocial support groups and counsels adolescents. Brian has had an undetectable viral load for more than 7 years. He provides an example to the kids of what life can be like in adulthood. They too can be healthy and have active romantic lives. And yet,
there's still stigma to HIV, even when literally almost every family has been affected by HIV. Stigma has been one of the biggest barriers to better HIV health outcomes, and people still think it is impossible to socialize, date, and have families.
One day when he is in the clinic, another counselor pulls Brian aside. He is directed to a girl who is sick from advanced HIV disease because she is not taking her medication.
So they tell me a story of a girl that has had suicidal tendencies more than 3 times, who was actually bluntly told the doctors of, "You know what? I do not want to lie to you. I'm not going to take this medication. You're going to give it to me, but I won't take it because I want to die."
Brian tries to counsel the girl, but she refuses to listen.
Until we actually get about relationships. That was the icebreaker for her and I. So I told her, "I mean, don't you want to have kids?" She's like, "No, I do not want to. I used to be beautiful before I started falling sick, before my skin went off. I used to have nice hips and I don't have them anymore."
Brian shows her that he is taking the same medication that's been prescribed to her. He tells her that his viral load is undetectable and that he has an active social life.
So I tell her, "You know what? Let's make a bet. Take this medication consistently for 3 months. If there's no improvement, please stop. I'll support your decision." Before the 3 months, she started sending me selfies and telling me, "You see, my skin is starting to clear. You see, I've added 1 kilogram." And so for her, that was a motivation to now start taking her medication. And fast forward, she now started sending screenshots. "You see, guys have started dating on me again. You see, I'm starting to become who I used to be." And the rest is history. She's now a strong advocate for mental health and HIV. She's a social entrepreneur within the HIV community for young people in Uganda. She won the beauty pageant for young people living with HIV. And yeah, she's an amazing, incredible young woman.
How does it feel that you saved a life? You probably saved more than one life.
Like you said, they've actually saved more lives. They call me Big Bro. So they're like, "You know what, Big Bro, I can't take this anymore. I am done. I can't live anymore." And then before you know, a year after, they are thriving and living a meaningful life. And what it means to me, I look at them in the angle of my own self. So saving a life for me is saving my own self, because if someone had not talked to me, I wouldn't have saved other lives. I look at them in the same way of how they would have felt if I was the one in the same situation, and the kind of support that I would have loved to have. At that particular moment, I do not want sugarcoats. I just want someone to tell me the reality of life, someone who has walked the journey that I am walking at the moment, and the assurance that it will be well.
Brian believes that he has a spiritual connection to the people whom he interacts with.
I believe in the Rastafarian movement. And why I believe in them is because of they believe in equality. And because of that, their vocabulary doesn't have you and I. Because they believe that you and I makes us two different people. And so they choose to say I and I. So when you're I and I'm looking at you in the same perspective I'm looking at myself. If anything hurts me, I'll know it will hurt you in equal measure because you're I and I. But for me, it's about the kindness, and we're one spirit.
From Brian's perspective, stigma is the #1 killer when it comes to HIV.
When you have had the opportunity to work in the health sector like I do, you realize that people take pills and medicine for so many different things. I mean, people have diabetes, people have hypertension, and they take their pills almost every day. But I still imagine how much stigma is attached to the antiretroviral drugs compared to the rest of the drugs that other people take. And so for me, that's a part that we need to work out in normalizing it. But more especially to emphasize that with the whole science around people who have undetectable viral load not being able to transmit the virus to their partners. I mean, this is a whole new era. I look forward to a time when HIV is normalized. People living with HIV, mostly young people, knowing that they can relate and date and have families and protect their families and not being able to pass on the virus.
And speaking of families,
I am an extremely proud father to a beautiful HIV negative daughter, and my wife is equally negative. And for me, I say this with pride because growing up, this is something that I never imagined would happen.
Thank you for tuning in to Beyond, a podcast from the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. Find out more about Brian at petaids.org. And make sure to subscribe to your favorite podcast app to never miss an episode. Many thanks to associate producer Madeline Morris. We had editing help from Dan Bobkoff from Rhyme Media. I'm Eric Bond. Join me next week for a conversation with Jane, a young woman living in Tanzania, learning about what it's like to be a mother.
The only thing I have right now is the kid. She's there and I have to be there for her. No matter what I went through, no matter what's the case, no matter everything, I have to be there for her.